Good morning. This is Kelly Thomas from Peregrine Endurance Sports. I'm here with an athlete that I found through social media named Ben, who has done several extreme triathlons. And I thought I would set up an interview with him for triathlon coaches and athletes who are looking into doing these races, because they certainly have more physical and mental and logistical demands than just our everyday local race. So Ben, thank you so much for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Kelly.
All right, if you don't mind, can you introduce yourself as a person and then as an athlete and tell us all the cool things that you've done?
My name is Ben, and originally I grew up in Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's on the east coast of Canada. I was always pretty active growing up in school. I played a lot of sports. Shortly after high school, I got involved in triathlon. So cross-country running was always one of my favorite sports. It was something that I actually used to do to train to keep my cardio for basketball and soccer. And I just loved it. And I fell in love with it even more after high school. So that's when I started doing triathlons, about a year or two after high school. And then kind of here I am today, now competing in the extreme triathlons, which I really enjoy. I just love the mental, like how far we can push ourselves mentally and physically. So that's really my drive to do those extreme events. So yeah, that's I guess I go a little bit further. I did kinesiology in university. So I've got a bit of a strength and conditioning background. And so I've always just been really, I've just always been really interested in the human body and what we can do and how far we can push ourselves. So yeah, that's a little bit of a background.
Great, thank you. So what has your favorite race been? And it doesn't have to be an extreme race. Just overall, what would you say your favorite race has been?
It's a good question. I've put a lot of thought into that. And I think my favorite race that I've ever done, triathlon-wise, would have to be Alaskaman. And I think I would say it's Alaskaman for the primary reason that it was my very first extreme triathlon. And just that overall experience of completing your first extreme tri is like, there's no words to really explain what that feeling is like. It's a pretty amazing thing. And I mean, Alaska's beautiful and the mountains, and it was a really well done race as well. So definitely one I would recommend for anyone that's looking to do an extreme triathlon. And I also really liked Swedeman in Sweden. That was a beautiful race as well. They're all really nice. They're all beautiful. They're all in, the mountains and in isolated territory. And they're all really, really fun. So yeah.
Alaskaman was also my first extreme.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
so beautiful and amazing and tough. Very, very tough.
How about that water, hey?
Yes. A little chilly
Very,
there.
very cold.
Great. Can you share with us how you prepared for the extreme triathlons, either event by event or just overall?
Did you want me to start, because I did Alaskaman in 2017. Now, this last year I did the 3 in that one summer. So did you want me to kind of go in depth with the races from last year?
Yeah, let's talk about those. Wow.
Yeah.
So summer, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. So last year was a little different from the first year, just because I was training for 3. So my program started I started in January training for those 3 races. I guess I could break it down a little bit of how I did it. So I did all of my training in 4-week blocks. So I would do 3 weeks. For the first couple of months, it was 3 weeks build. So, my TSS would probably go from 600 to 800 to 900 for the first, I think it was 2 to 3 months. And then I would go through that build period where I held my TSS for 3 weeks, and then recovery week, 3 weeks, recovery week, up until the race. So for me, I hovered around 1,000 on average per week, 900 to 1,000. But I had a little bit of an injury actually just before Celtman, a month out from that. So I'll get into that a little later. But yeah, so basically what I did was I did the 4-week blocks, and the way that I break my training down is I did about 3 swims a week, which would average to around 10,000 meters. Then in my biking, as I was building, I was doing around 3 sessions a week. And I gradually built the intensity and the volume as the program went on. In my peak weeks, I was doing around 200, depending on the week, to 300 kilometers a week. So I would be on my bike for close to 10 hours every week during my peak weeks. And then on the running side, for me personally, I love to run. It's my favorite out of all 3 disciplines. But I know that when I put a lot of volume into my run, I have a very high chance of injury. So for me personally, I dropped my run mileage down a little bit last year. And honestly, I did 2 to 4 runs a week. Like some runs I would only run twice, which would usually be like a 15K in the middle of the week. And then on the weekend, I would do a longer run. So that would go anywhere from 20 to 35K, depending on where I was doing the program. And then, of course, I would have a brick session in there. So the way I like to do my bricks is I would do them every second week. So usually Saturdays I would do them. So every second Saturday I would do a brick session. And I think the longest brick I did before my race would have been probably looking at about a 5 to 6 hour ride followed by 15K run. So usually that was about a 7-hour day. And that was like in my peak week.
Great. And did you include strength and conditioning in your training?
So that's a very good question. As a strength, like I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I've worked with many athletes in the gym, and I always stress you have to do strength and conditioning. It's so important. I know the importance of it. And this is one thing, like if people can take something away today, I really hope they can take this piece away. It's don't underestimate the importance of strength and conditioning, and not just strength and conditioning, but you need to work with someone who knows your body and what your imbalances are. For me, I kind of know what my imbalances are, but my training used to get so crazy where I would kind of just throw the strength and conditioning to the side. I'd be so motivated to get up and I'd be like, I'd rather get in an extra swim, or I'd rather get in an extra bike. And honestly, what happens, and it's happened to me now for at 3 out of the last 7 seasons, I've been injured. And every season I say, okay, I really got to take strength and conditioning more serious. But this year, this is the 3rd season that I've been injured, and it's all due with my knee and my IT band. But, I've been out for 6 months. I missed out because I had signed up for Canadaman this year. That's next try. And I actually had signed up for a half Ironman. I had to drop out of both of those races due to this knee injury. So one thing if people can take away is like, don't underestimate the importance of strength training. Because I really think that if I had gotten in the gym just twice a week for 45 minutes, 2 times a week, I think that I could have prevented this injury from happening, because I know what the imbalance is. So strength and conditioning in my off season, I always do it. I actually enjoy it. But when I get into the actual season, I just honestly haven't been making enough time for it like I should have been. So my mindset going into 2020 is to really implement 2 strength training sessions every single week and put that on top of my list, more important than anything else, because there's nothing worse than being injured and not being able to do a race. So that would be a little bit of my advice on that side of things. And I mean, if you have to give up 1 hour give up an hour of swimming to do an hour of strength, or an hour of biking to do an hour of strength, it's not going to ruin the race for you. I believe you'll still be able to race. You just got to make time for it. So yeah, that's kind of my feedback on strength and conditioning. So
yes, I definitely agree. Strength
yeah,
is so important. A bummer to hear about your knee. I hope
Yeah, it's, you know what, it's coming around now. I've done a lot of work on it, and I think I've been working with a few professionals and like physios, and I think that it's really getting to a place where it's healthy, but I just need to keep doing those exercises in order to keep it there. So yeah, I'm motivated this year to continue to do strength training for at least twice a week and keep the joints strong and keep myself from getting injured.
Oh, great. Good luck with
Yeah.
that. Yeah. All right. So you said up to 10 hours a week just on the bike, and then plus you're running, swimming, and strength. What was your longest training week going into your extreme triathlons?
I would say the longest in terms of time, around 20 to 22 hours. And in terms of volume, upwards of 45 to 50 kilometer running, almost 300K on the bike, and then 10 to 12,000 meters of swimming. And that was a pretty intense week. I mean, like one Saturday, I remember doing, 7 hours between the bike and the run. And then later on that evening, I went and swam. So that was just an 8-hour day just right there, right? So, and then the next day, I think on that particular weekend, that was my peak, I had gotten up and did another 4-hour ride. So my body was pretty toast after that weekend, but that was my peak weekend. And honestly, I felt good. Like once you build up to that volume, I just didn't jump right into that. It took time, months and months of training. But from doing Alaskaman, I knew what I had to do in order to be able to do these races. So I was in the mindset of, basically before I did any of these races, I wanted to make sure that I was comfortable to do a 200-kilometer ride, get off and run 10K and feel okay.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying feel great, but feel okay. And these weren't I wasn't doing these at race pace efforts, right? These were all in the aerobic zone and very low intensity, but I just wanted, psychologically, I wanted to be able to say, yeah, I feel good. I feel okay. And I think that just helps a lot with your mindset before you go into a race. And that's personally helped me. It's not something that I recommend everybody do, but that's what's helped me with all the races that I've done. So.
And what would you say your average training week in terms of volume and time looked like? And I know it changes throughout, but just to give an idea to the coaches on what our athletes should be putting in on a normal training week.
Yeah. So for my base weeks, like where I'm just, where the TSS increases throughout those 3-week blocks, like they're very, very different. Cause like it could go, I might do, I would usually time my run. So I would do like an hour run here, and then my long one would be an hour and a half. And then the next week would be, an hour and 15, and then a 2-hour run, and then just gradually build. But when I was in my build stages, so when that TSS was the same for 3 weeks in a row, that's where my volume got really kind of crazy. And for those weeks, I was doing time-wise anywhere from 15 to 18 hours a week. I'd say on average, like that's average. The peak week would have been 22, and then probably the lowest week would have been 13 to 14. So that's time-wise. And then on those weeks, I would definitely get a minimum of 200. Like for my bike rides, every Saturday, I always did a minimum of a 4-hour ride, minimum. So I would usually get 100K in every single week. Even on my recovery weeks, I would only drop 30 minutes. So I'd still get 3 to 3.5 hours in, 30 minutes to an hour. My running was, again, usually around 50K. Like I didn't put in 50, 60, 70, 80 kilometers a week. I'm under the impression that I don't believe that you need to put that much time into running, because I haven't done it and I've been fine. I've been okay. But again, it depends on the person and what their strengths and what they want to work on. But for me, I did around 40 to 50K a week on that side. And then swimming was around 10,000 meters. And I was quite comfortable doing 10,000 meters. In my peak week, maybe I'd be closer to 13 or 14,000, but usually 3 swims a week, 3,000, 3,500 meters. That's kind of what I was pushing.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that'll be really helpful.
Yeah.
All right. So you mentioned being prepared mentally for these races.
Yeah.
And some of your physical preparation helped with that. But let's talk about how you stayed motivated during your training for the races.
Like, I thought about this a bit, and I think the number one thing for me was knowing what my why was. And I'll elaborate a little bit on that. So when you sign up for this race, I feel like, because it's no joke, it's a long distance, they are very tough, and it takes a lot of mental strength to push through the training to be able to do a race like that. And I think you need to know what your why is. And what I mean by that is, like, why have you decided to sign up for this race? What are you, like, what's driving you to do this? What are those deep feelings or thoughts that you have that push you to get to that finish line or push you to get through these training sessions? Because honestly, the training is really sometimes the hardest part, right? Getting through all those blocks of training. And then, if you do it the right way, the race is still going to be tough, but you know that you're going to be able to do it. So for me, it was always my why. So whenever, like, everyone goes through tough training sessions. So to get on a trainer in the wintertime for 6 hours or 7 hours, mentally, that's tough. But if you know what your why is and you keep telling yourself that, I feel like that's, for me, has personally what has helped me push through all, like, the fatigue and the pain, and just to get through those sessions. And then once you get through it, it feels great. It's tough, but it feels great when you're done. And yeah, I mean, that's probably my biggest thing. It's find out what your why is, and then make sure that that's what you follow throughout the whole training program. Yeah.
Great. That's an excellent tip. I have to admit, when I signed up for Alaskaman, I had done a couple of iron distances before, and Alaskaman was somewhat local for me. I was living in Alaska at the time, and it was a lottery, and I thought, I'm just going to sign up. It's going to be great if I get in, and that was kind of just the challenge of getting in was part of my why. And then I got in, and I had not developed my why to push that was going to keep me going. So I struggled a little bit with my personal training and racing because I was seeking my why, which I think by the end of the race, I had found my why.
Yeah.
Identifying it beforehand would have been a lot more helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And I just think it's so important to know what you're training for, because the training can get pretty intense, as you know, right?
It is, yes. Yeah. Especially for those of us where this is not our only job, right?
And you know what? That's a very, like, if you're not training full time, if you have a full time job outside of training, like, one thing that I've really found, and this might be helpful for some coaches and athletes out there, it's you need to become laser focused with your schedule. You need to have laser focus. If you're working a full-time job, 40, 50 hours a week, if you're training for 15 to 20 hours a week, and then outside of that, if you're someone who has kids, like, I don't have any kids, so, I had that bit of extra time. But if you have kids, I mean, to be able to spend time with your friends, your family, your kids, like, you need to be laser focused, and you need to have a schedule for every minute of every hour of every day. And I did that, and I just worked and trained. Basically, that's all I did. And I even sacrificed, like, during my really hard training weeks and stuff, there would be times when I wouldn't see anybody, because when you do a 7 or 8 hour session on a Saturday, all you want to do afterwards is sleep.
Right.
Right. So yeah, it's you really have to, before you start that program, I would suggest, if you do have a family and you have kids, sitting down and speaking with your significant other and just be like, listen, how can we work this out so I'm able to train these 15 to 20 hours? Because when you're training 20 hours and you're trying to do many other things, it can become stressful. So I would just suggest having a plan, and not just a plan for the first month, but a plan like when you're in your fourth and fifth month in those peak weeks, to be able to work it out where you can fit in your training in your schedule. Yeah.
Yeah, that communication with your support system is very important.
Important for sure. Yeah.
And they need to feel valued too, because they're important in your life. And it's hard to show that sometimes when you're training X amount of hours and working and then you're tired.
Absolutely.
So making sure
Yeah.
that you have time, you set aside time for the people that are important in your life too.
You have to, yeah. Schedule it in there. Yeah.
All right. During racing, do you use any specific techniques, mantras, special words, pictures, anything like that to help you kind of get through the race? Or what do you find is most helpful?
When I'm in a race, the way that I usually race is I make myself confident in my training. So that's like, my training really transfers into the race. So when I'm on race day, when I wake up, I'm like, I know I got this. I've done the training and nothing is going to stop me today. And I feel like that's what's really helped me push through in those dark times in a race, if you know what I mean. And then not only that, but it's, again, I'll go back to the why. When I get to those really tough, dark times, I fall back on my why. And that is what helps me. So for mantra, not really, but I would say for me personally, it's, I focus on, or I'm confident in the training that I've done up to that race. And then I fall back on my why when it gets real tough. So for me, yeah, those would be the two things. And just going in with a mindset that, like, don't go in with a mindset saying like, well, what if this happens, or what if this happens? Like, for me, many things are going to happen. We all know that. It's a long day, right? Anything can happen in these races, but it's about persevering and pushing through and telling yourself that you can do this. And if you go in with a negative mindset, I think that's the worst thing ever. You want to go in with a positive mindset always. Always go in with positivity. Always believe that you've done the training and that you're going to come out on the other end and cross that finish line. And it will happen. The law of attraction. It will happen if you believe in yourself. So yeah, that's kind of how I always go in to all my races. It's just my mindset and my why. Yeah.
Well, great. Thank you for sharing those with us.
Yeah.
All right. So extreme triathlons are normally located in far away, distant countries from where we live. Can you talk a little bit about your logistics preparation? Another thing is that you're often required to bring your own support crew. So if you can include that with your logistics preparation too, how did you figure that out?
The hard way. So I've got some horror stories on on the logistical side of things. So it's definitely been a learning experience. So yeah, I guess we can dive into it a little bit here now, but the number one thing that I would say about these races is, and I think it's Aaron who race directed Alaskaman, right? So he was the director. Yeah. So he stressed to everybody right from the beginning, like, make sure you have everything figured out. And I just honestly procrastinated a lot. It was, I think 2 months out before I even booked my hotel. So what I would suggest is the minute that you book and that you decide to do an extreme triathlon, make sure that you book your hotel rooms, make sure you book your rent-a-car, make sure you book your flights, everything. And something else that I always do is make sure you have insurance on everything, because you never know what could happen. That's just something that I personally, for an extra $100 or $200, I believe that it's totally worth it. And then the last little thing that I'll add to that is make sure you are always in the location that you need to be in for that race, a minimum of 4 days before race day. 4 to 5 days. I would even go a week. Like now when I start to go to these races, I'm taking a week because you need that much time to really get to know the area. There's so many. It's not like if you've done an Ironman before, it's very different from an Ironman. Like because your support. Would you agree with that, Kelly?
I would agree with that.
It's very different. So you really need to make sure you have all of those things in place. And then the other thing is that you have a support crew. So you actually can't do these races without having a support crew member. And what your support crew does is they actually run with you in that last, depending on the race, some of the races will allow the support member to do the whole marathon with you at the end. And some of them will only allow you to do the mountain section. So most of the X-Tri races have a mountain section where you and your training or support crew go up the mountain together. So that's another thing. Like you always want to make sure that they're also training so that they can keep up with you when you're doing those mountain sections and that last 10K. So yeah, those are a few things that I would definitely suggest. Now we can kind of, I guess, dive a little bit into some of the issues that I've had. If you want, I can tell a little story that happened in Celtman, maybe?
Yes, please.
Okay, so Celtman Alaskaman was the first X-Tri I did. And then last year, Celtman was the first X-Tri of the 3 I did last summer. So Celtman is actually in a little tiny town way up in northern Scotland. So first off, we had booked our flights and we only had 2 days by the time we landed in Scotland before race day. So we landed on a Thursday evening and the race was on a Saturday morning. Bad idea. So Thursday morning, our flight was supposed to get into Scotland, but what happened was we had gotten a flight delay, so we didn't end up landing in Scotland until 6 p.m. And to make it worse, that was a red-eye flight the night before, so we actually landed in an airport in Ireland, in Dublin. We were in Dublin all night in the airport. We didn't get a hotel, so we just slept with our luggage on the floor, basically. And then Thursday morning, we woke up and then we flew to Scotland, but it got delayed, so we didn't end up getting there till like in the evening. It was like 4 or 5 p.m. So as soon as we got to Scotland, we had to get our rent-a-car. And then this is another thing. Keep this in mind when you're traveling. Figure your cell phones out and your data packages. We had no idea what we were doing. So we had to go to a mall in Scotland. We had to get a new data package and a new phone number in Scotland. So that took up a lot of time.
Oh my goodness.
And everybody on our support crew had to get a new one. So we were all trying to figure out our new numbers. And then by this time, it was 7 p.m. and we had a 7-hour drive to get to the race location. Okay. So, and then to make it even worse on top of this, we were driving on the opposite side of the road. So I've never driven a vehicle on that side before. So that was another thing that added to all the commotion. So like keep all these things in mind when you're traveling. So anyways, we drove up, we finally got to the hotel. I think by the time we got there, after we ate and, got gas and all those things, it was 2:30 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. So we had not slept the night before. We were up all night because we were in the airport. So maybe an hour of sleep. The next night we landed in Scotland, finally got to our hotel. We had to get up early that day because we had a meeting with like the whole group at the place where the race was taking place, the little community. So we got up early. So we had only had like 3 hours of sleep that night. Got up early. Here's another thing. We had to drive an hour and a half. So because I was so late booking the hotel for Scotland, we had to drive an hour and a half outside of the race start. Yeah, so it was crazy, right? So we drove all the way to the race start that morning, and then we had to check in. So this is the most important part. Like, you have to have this locked in when you're going to these races. In every extreme triathlon, you're going to have a race guide. These are all the things that you and your support crew need. And your support crew. Don't forget your support crew. They need all the items that you have. So I had in this list of items, I had all of the things that I needed, right? So, your rain jacket, your thermal layer, your compass, all of those things I had, flashlight. So when we checked in our bags, the guy was like, so my girlfriend, she was my support crew. And he was like, where's her compass? Where's her thermal layer? And all of it. And we were like, oh, I just thought that I needed the compass. So I just misread. I didn't read in detail. So make sure you read that race report in detail and make sure that you have every little thing that is on that race report, or they will not let you race. Luckily, this race has been going on for almost a decade. And you got to remember, this community is tiny. This is a very isolated spot in northern Scotland. So there's literally probably 200 people that live in this community. Luckily, where the race has been going on for so long, they had a little store down the road, and they brought in specialty items that people had forgotten in previous years. So they had compasses and like the thermal layers and the gloves and the hats. So luckily we ran down, because I was freaking out, because we had no time to go to like a town or a city, because we would have had to drive like 3 or 4 hours. So we walked down to the store. Luckily they had a compass and I think gloves and maybe a hat. There might have been a few other little things that we needed. So we were able to purchase it. We ran back, checked in our bags, and all was good. So by the time, this was a crazy day. Like by this time, it was getting around 3 or 4 o'clock, and then the athletes, like the big athletes meeting was coming up. I still had not eaten. I was like, I haven't even eaten yet. This is crazy. So I'm literally racing tomorrow.
This is the day before the race, right?
The day before the race, because
no.
Oh yeah, it was insanity. So anyways, we do the athletes meeting. Right after that, we drive to go look for a restaurant. We finally found one about an hour away. Ate dinner, came back to the hotel. We didn't get back till 8:30 in the night. At this point, I had not had my bike taken apart. I had not had a chance to take any of my luggage out, get any of my gear together, my triathlon suit, my wetsuit, nothing. So at 8:30, I start to take all my equipment out and line it up for the day before. So you know what that's like, right? That can take like an hour and a half, 2 hours by the time you check your bike and all those things over. So it was 11:30 by the time I got to bed.
Oh my goodness.
The race started at 4:30 a.m. It was an hour and a half drive to the race start. I had to be there by 3. So I got up at 1:30 a.m. So this is what I'm saying. Now you can see it all, like how it can get pretty crazy. So all of this in reality should have been done like 3 days before. I should have had the bike. I should have known exactly where, the race start was to, all the logistics of it. I should have had figured out, but I never. So if there's one thing I can tell you, just make sure you read that race report and make sure you're in that location 4 days before, just for peace of mind. You can get to know the area. You can maybe even drive the bike course, look at where the swim start is to, maybe even get in if you want to, if you're fearless enough to hop in a day before, because Scotland was cold. It was like Alaskaman, really, really, really cold.
Oh, bird.
So yeah, those are logistically, like, make sure you have all of those things figured out before you get to the race start. It takes a lot. It's not one of those things that you want to leave to the last minute, and
Definitely
in
not.
those areas, there's people that I've noticed that there's more Airbnbs in those little communities close to the race. So try to book those up right away. And you know what, guys, like a lot of Airbnbs don't have a charge. So if you can't make it, you can usually cancel the Airbnb as long as it's like 2 or 3 or 4 weeks out, right? So I would just suggest as soon as you sign up, look for an Airbnb, book it, and then you're good to go, right? And then book your flights and all those other little things. Read the race report, make sure you have everything, and do your checklist before you leave
Get
your
them early.
Yeah.
And did you have to get anything special to travel for, like passport?
Yes. Yeah.
What did you need to get coming from Canada?
Yeah. So I just had to update my passport.
Okay.
So I had actually done that when I went to Alaska the year before. So my passport was good to go for all those. Like I just did a 10-year one. So I'm good to travel outside of Canada for 10 years. So that's just, I'm not sure exactly how that works in the US, but basically all I needed was my passport. And that's really the only thing that I had to worry about. That was back before Alaskaman. But other than that, it was pretty good. And currency. That's one thing I guess we could get into if you want to. Just, it can be expensive. So just make sure you figure out what the currency is in the areas that you travel to and kind of make a budget for yourself.
And where did you exchange your money to pay for these things? Or were you able to use your card? How does this work?
Yeah. I just used credit card for everything. Yeah. Some things were cash, but mostly everything was just put on the credit card. Yeah.
All right, great. Well, before we go into race day fueling and hydration, why don't we talk about budgeting for this? Because it sounds like there's a lot more gear and travel than our normal race. So what did you use to be able to budget for these trips?
That is like, budgeting is also something that I really learned probably the hard way. I ended up spending a lot more money than what I originally anticipated I would have spent. So in and I actually did an expense report on this. So I can actually just open it up here. I have it here, and I can just kind of just share a few things. So
Yeah,
first of all, oh, sorry, Kelly.
that'd be great. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I'm traveling. I guess where you're traveling from, it's going to be different from every area, but I can kind of give you just a quick breakdown of what it was. So for Celtman, that was the first race I did in the season. Registration for that race in Canadian dollars cost $660. The flights were $1,000. That's both ways. The car rental was $591, so say $600. The hotel ended up being $1,500. So that was $1,500 for 6 nights. That's how long we were gone for.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No, we ended up getting an Airbnb outside of that. So 1,500 plus the Airbnb that we had for 2 nights was $1,000. Now keep in mind, so $2,500 total, but keep in mind this was split 4 ways. Right. So it wasn't just between because I had a few people come with me to the race. So if you guys do it, that's something that I would suggest. Like, we found an Airbnb after the race was over, and it was just a big house, and it was a really nice spot. It was like, I think $500 a night, but between 4 or 5 ways, it wasn't actually that much per night. So that's something that I do suggest as well, is like getting an Airbnb if you can find one in the area. And it's just a great way of spending time with everyone that comes with you in a big house, as opposed to like hotel rooms, right? So that was a nice part of it as well. That was a nice part of the trip, actually. So about $2,500 for 6 nights, and that was split 5 ways. So then I did take out cash. So I took out $700 in cash. Pretty much spent, I think we might have had like $50 left at the end of it. So that's what I budgeted for that. This is another important one to think about, but it's how much luggage cost. So when I booked my flight, I didn't realize this. So I went for the cheapest flight. And what I didn't realize when I booked that flight was that in the European airline, which is a little bit different from what I'm used to here in Canada, but it didn't include the baggage, the luggage. So when we got there, we had paid over $600 in luggage fees when we got into
Wow.
Dublin. Yeah. So just from Dublin to Scotland, it costs $300 each way. Because I have my bike bag and stuff with me too, right? And your bike bag over there, I think it was 150. After they do the conversion, or the exchange rate, currency, it was like $150 or $175. Plus, I had other luggage with me. So keep that in mind when you go, especially when you're traveling outside.
Wow. Yeah.
So all together for Celtman, that race was a total of, once I broke it down, for me, it was $3,600, and that's individual.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's how much Celtman cost me personally. So that was Celtman. Any questions on that one, Kelly? I can go through Canadaman real quick and then Swedeman, but
Were they pretty similar, or was Celtman the most expensive?
yeah, so Celtman wasn't. It was actually, so I'll break down Canadaman real quick. That one actually wasn't too bad because I traveled within Canada. So that was the cheapest out of all the races I did. That one was just over $2,000. So that one wasn't too bad. Registration was similar. Flights were pretty cheap because we were traveling within Canada. So yeah, everything, that one was pretty cheap. And then Swedeman was the most expensive. And just real quickly, the reason being, it was Swedeman was very similar to Celtman expense-wise. But the thing that made it that little bit extra more expensive was the exchange rate was so much different over in Sweden and Norway, because we had spent a little bit of time in Norway as well. We were there for a week. So we did the race in Sweden, but we spent a couple days in Norway. So I think it's pretty funny. After the race, we went to a McDonald's in Norway just to get a burger. And the burger ended up costing $24 for a Big Mac meal.
Wait, what? $24 for a Big Mac meal?
No, really. Yeah. When I went home and looked on my credit card. No, I swear, $24. People don't believe me when I say it, but I swear. So think about that, right? Like if a Big Mac meal costs $24, like what's a nice sit down dinner meal? It's it's very expensive there. So one thing that I would suggest is really just making sure you understand the exchange rates and put all that together before you go, so you can really budget well before you actually leave. Because we ended up getting over there, and when we realized how expensive everything was, we were just like, oh my God, we're just better off going and getting a few groceries and just cooking at the hotel, or yeah. So just keep that in mind when you're traveling.
All right. Yeah, that exchange rate. You have to be
Crazy.
careful about that
Crazy.
one.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Let's talk a little bit more now about race day fueling and the hydration. Did you bring your own with you? Did you buy it there? It sounds like for Celtman, you didn't have a lot of extra time to do shopping for food.
We didn't, but we figured out a way to do it. So we actually did, that night we got into Scotland, we actually did go grocery shopping.
Okay.
And for me personally, I don't bring, the only thing I bring with me I use Stinger gummies. So I will buy those before I leave, and I will put 10 or 15 packs of those in my bag with me before I leave. And then salt pills. Those are the other thing. So the two most important fueling items that I take with me are salt pills, and then the 15 gummies, Stinger. Like there's all kinds of things like gels. I'm not a big fan of gels or the waffles, like the energy waffles. Like I'm not a big fan of those. I've tried them all in training, and they just don't sit well with my stomach. So for me personally, I just like the gummies, and that's what I use. But yeah, so I usually buy all the fuel once I'm at the location of the race.
And
For
did you
fuel,
strictly use the Stinger gummies for both the bike and the run portions, or did you use other things to supplement?
definitely. Like something that I've learned for me, and everyone, this is one thing that, is different, is going to be different for everyone. Like what you eat during a race might be completely different from what I eat during a race. So for me, I find that gummies, I just get sick to my stomach after eating them so long. It's just sugar, right? So
Right.
I always try to get a little bit more whole food on the bike, because on the bike, the food is not like kind of jumbling around as much as it would be when you're running, for instance, right? So on the bike, like it's not like I've like in Celtman, I had a chicken wrap on,
Yeah.
on my bike. Yeah. but that works for me, right? Like I really like that helped me. It was something different, and I enjoyed the taste. It was good. And that's what I had, right? Like you're looking at a 16 or 17-hour long day. So for Celtman, that's what I did. On the bike, I had a chicken wrap. And then, on the run, actually, when I was coming in on my bike into the transition area for the bike to run section, I had my support crew was passing me in the car, and they were like, "Do you need anything?" I was like, "Can you get me a coffee? I'm so tired." So they were able to find a coffee, and in transition, they just gave me a coffee, and I basically drank that coffee for like the first 5 or 10 minutes of the run portion, and that honestly helped boost me. So in these races, like, because your support crew's with you, so in these races they can help and give you food throughout the bike and the run, right? It's not like you're limited to that. So like if you haul over on the side of the road next to your support crew, they can give you that chicken wrap or whatever it is that you might want on the bike, or they can help you refuel. Like if you need to exchange a bottle for a new bottle of Gatorade, that's what I usually drink on the bike. Then they can do that for you.
Did you have a preset schedule with your team on where you wanted them to stop, or how did you plan that
Yes.
part?
Super important. Yeah. So before the race started, I said, okay, guys, this is where I think I'm going to be based on my training times. I think this is what I can average for these distances. And this is where we should meet up. And these are the things that I need you to have prepared for me. So have a bottle of Gatorade. And like sometimes when you're racing, it's easy sometimes it's easy to forget to fuel, right? So right? So doing these races, like I would tell them, like, you need to make sure that I'm drinking this Gatorade before this mark. And I remember in Celtman specifically, it was just a cold day. It was really cold. It was raining. It was windy. And I just didn't want to drink cold fluids. But they kept on me. Like when I got the 30 or 40K, they were like, you got to drink. And they would drive past me like, make sure you're drinking, make sure you're hydrating, fueling. And that's specifically what I told them to do. But when you're in the race, sometimes you just don't really want to, depending on the conditions and how you're feeling. But I knew I had to. So I kept sipping back on it. And eventually, I got through that bottle before that first stop, and then they refueled me and then got me to the next stop. But definitely that's important. Like always have a plan with your support crew on where you're going to meet, what types of things you need, how much time you're going to stop for. That's one other really important factor that I've learned over the last couple of years doing the X Tris. It's funny, I actually went back to Alaskaman, and I think in that race, just from stopping alone, I wasted an hour and a half.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Now in Alaskaman, in the run, I really had a tough run. It was hard. I had pretty good swim, pretty good bike ride, but I had a real bad run in Alaskaman. So that's where a lot of my time went. But when you compare it to like Swedeman, that was the last race I did. So that was in August of last year. I cut my time down to just under 2 minutes on the bike of total stoppage time. And then on the run, it was under like 15 minutes on the run. So like very, very little time was stopped. And I ended up saving over like an hour, right, to add on to that final time, which was, for me, when I look back on it, I was like, yeah, like that's a lot of time that I'm just spending, just stopped. So and one thing that helped me with that is if you need to stop, power walk. Never just stop and sit there, right? Like if you're on the run portion of the race, if you need to stop and fuel, or if you need to fuel, or if you need to hydrate, don't stop. Just take it out of your pack and just walk, power walk. Because that's a lot better than just stopping, because you're wasting time. Every minute you're stopped, you're just wasting time.
Right.
Yeah. So that's just a little tip that I have for people, because a lot of times you might think we're such a long race, like, oh, I'm just going to stop for a minute here or there, but it all adds up. It really does. It's like, over 15 or 16 hours, not hard to put on an extra hour if you're stopping, 2 or 3 times every hour. So yeah, just a little bit of advice there.
I think one of my only goals going into Alaskaman the second year that I did it was to cut down on my stop time, because
Yeah.
I went back and looked at my Garmin and I was like, what was I doing during all this time?
Yeah.
Because it was so much. And my crew, they kept me on target. They would say, okay, you've been here for this amount of time. It's time to keep going.
That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely help
like
you accountable. You
support.
want to sit there and tell them, hey, I saw this on my ride, and sometimes you can get distracted. And
so easy, yeah.
all right. So Ben, do you have any other words of wisdom specifically for coaches that are looking to train their athlete for their very first extreme triathlon?
I would say for coaches, specificity. Like you as a coach, you need to do a little bit of if you haven't done an X-Tri before, then I definitely suggest doing a little bit of research or talking to someone who's done the race, because they're very different races from a race like you would, like an Ironman race, for an example, right? Like a lot of the logistics of everything, and then not just that, but the actual training conditions. So like I can start with the swim real quick. Like when I went to Alaskaman, I had done several triathlons in the past, but there was nothing as cold in my life as that swim. Like that was crazy cold. And then I don't know if you remember, Kelly, but when you got about halfway through that swim, remember where that waterfall came?
The waterfall. Oh yes, I will never forget the waterfall.
Can you remember hitting that? Like you're already freezing, and then when you hit that, you actually get colder. Can you remember that?
Oh, I remember it. Yes.
I was like, I'm pretty sure I can't get any colder, but as soon as I hit that wall of water, like where the waterfall came down, it was just like another level of freezing. So for like, you have to understand like how to train the athlete to get prepared for a swim like that, because there were people that were taken out of that swim, during the year that we did it. I can remember seeing people getting taken out, right?
Right.
So it's really important to train your body for that. So what I did, luckily living in Newfoundland in June and July, the water is still pretty cold here. So what I did is, and I don't recommend this for everybody, but just do what works for you. I used to get in the water without a wetsuit on. And it was similar conditions. Now I wouldn't do a full 4,000 meter swim, but it was similar conditions. Like it was probably 12, 13, 14 degrees. I would get in with no wetsuit, swim for 1,000 meters and get out. And I would be like shivering and shaking. But I used to do that like once a week or twice a week, depending on how close I was to the race. And I found that helped me adapt to the temperature of the water. So when I did Celtman, or not Celtman, when I did Alaskaman, I was kind of used to the cold. The only thing that I wasn't used to was a duration. So I had never swam lots of 4,000 meter swims, but not in that temperature. So
Right.
that's just keep that in mind when if you're a coach and you're training your athlete. Number two is like what makes these triathlons extreme. It's like the temperature and then the elevation gain, right? Like all of these races have massive elevation gains. So train, like think about that and then implement that into the program. So for me, I was under the impression of, for what I did for my training is I got in on my bike and I hit hills, big hills, and I would do repeats up and down, up and down, up and down. And then and you can kind of do it on a trainer if you up your power really high, but honestly, I just think there's a psychological part of just looking, like doing it on a trainer and doing it on an actual hill or mountain is very different for me,
I would agree
right?
with
Like
that.
I like to get myself prepared by actually going to like a big ass mountain and going up it on a bike, going back down and going up it, because that's what you're going to do in these races, right? So that's another thing that I implemented into my training program. Once a week, I would just go out and do hill repeats. And then, the last one would be the run, right? So in the run, you need to train your body, because running on a flat surface, on a road surface, is different from running in a trail. So that's point number one. And then point number two is running on a trail and then going up an elevation game like we did in Mount Alyeska, where it's literally like a wall. You're using different, but it was, right? Can you remember that initial part that we went up on that mountain? It was just like
Yeah.
climbing a wall. And it's different. It really is different. Like it's not, no one's running that section. So you have to adapt your muscles to be able to do the run, first of all, do the swim, the bike, then the run on the flat section, and then the run or the hike on the mountain section. And I remember watching an interview that James Lawrence did, the Iron Cowboy. Can you remember the interview that he did in that race? And he said, the race doesn't start until we hit the mountain.
Yes, I saw that.
Can you remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he was right.
You know what? It's so true. Like I was on that mountain. It was 10K. I was on that mountain, I think, for 3 hours, 2 or 3 hours for 10K.
Going all the way up just to go all the way back down. And they're not kidding. You really do go all the way back
All the way up.
down.
All the way down, and then
again.
all the way up. Yeah. So, when you're implementing and when you're doing programming for this kind of training, like, I would run 20K and then I would try to find like a lot of elevation gain and then run or power walk up a really steep elevation. And if you're in a place where you're training in a very flat environment, I suggest either if you can't drive somewhere to the mountains, if you can't get out there on a weekly basis, then use the stair climber. So do your run outside and find a gym that has a stair climber. And then once you're done, say your 20K run or your 15K or 25K or whatever it is for that day, get on that stair climber for an hour and develop those muscles. Train your mind and your body to be able to do that, because that's going to be the hardest section of the entire race. Right? Or wouldn't say the hardest section, but definitely one of the hardest sections of the race is going to be that mountain section. So you need to make sure you're well prepared for that. And I don't think doing all flat road running is going to get you well prepared. So you need to make sure you're being specific to the type of training for that race that you're doing.
Great. Those are great tips. How about to athletes where they've never done an extreme triathlon before and they want to do their first? Do you have any words of wisdom you can share with them?
Yeah, that's like if you've never done an extreme triathlon before, it's super exciting when you sign up. Like it really is like an adventure race. It's something like, for me, I'm completely hooked. I'm addicted. I love them. I'm going to keep doing them. But you know, I know I've referenced this a few times now, but I'll go back again and say, before you sign up, know what your why is. Why do you want to do this? What is it? What is it that's fueling you and driving you to do it? That would be one thing. Number two is, you know, I don't suggest signing up if it's your first full distance, like Ironman, like that amount of distance that you've ever done before. Make sure you have a good 6 months of training. I would suggest starting 6 months out. And then before you sign up, this is super important. Don't leave this to the last minute, but make sure you have a support crew. Have someone who is willing to be like, yep, I'm going to train. Like, they obviously won't need to train for the full race, but they need to train for that mountain section, and they need to be able to be there to support you, and they have to be willing to travel to go with you as well. So make sure you have that person to do that race with. Now, you know, there have been athletes that I've spoken with that have their support crew for whatever reason couldn't make it, and then usually the race directors are pretty good. Like, they'll find someone locally, but it's just, you know, logistically it's a little bit tougher when you have to look for someone that you've never ran with before, you don't really know that well. Yeah, so just I definitely suggest making sure you have someone in mind and having that conversation with them before you sign up for the race.
Yeah, I know some people go on the Facebook pages and they've been successful finding their support crew that way.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
definitely harder, especially if there's a language barrier. It can be very
Yeah,
difficult
exactly.
with that.
Yeah.
All right. How about higher level athletes who are maybe interested in doing these extreme triathlons and they're looking for performance? Do you have any words of wisdom for them?
Yeah. If you're looking for performance, I would suggest, if you're a higher level athlete, let's just take Ironmans for an example. If you've done several Ironmans, you're looking for that next big push. I think for people who are looking to go there and to perform, again, I will reference specific training. You might have done several Ironmans before, but an extreme triathlon is very, very different just because of the conditions, right? So like, if you're used to doing Ironmans where the water temperature is 20 degrees, so I'm using degrees Celsius, not Fahrenheit. So 20 degrees Celsius, and you don't train in conditions where it's 12 degrees Celsius, that's going to be a problem for you in the race. So you need to be specific, because I've seen people in all of the races that I've done get hauled out of the water, right? In all the races I've done, I've seen people get hauled out of the water. So if you're going to go there to perform, don't let the swim hold you back from doing the rest of the race. Like, make sure you're ready to do that swim. Like, make sure you've trained your body and your body is adapted to that cold weather. Like, you have to be mentally prepared for that. So if you're going there for performance, make sure you're being specific to the training, right? Same thing on the bike. Like, Celtman was the hardest race I've ever done. And of all the extreme tries, it was definitely Celtman. And, you know, the conditions there were absolutely horrendous. They were awful. The swim was freezing, but that's what makes it extreme, right? The swim was freezing. On the bike, you know, I had to battle through, we all did, everyone who did the race battled through 40, 50 kilometer headwinds.
Wow.
Right? So, you know, that's a huge factor. And then on top of that, it was a 205 kilometer bike ride. And yes, I'm saying 205, that extra 5K, because that last 5K felt like forever. But, you know, we battled through that. And then on top of that, it was raining. It rained the whole time and downpoured. I mean, it downpoured all day.
Goodness.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you have the run. And then in Celtman, that was specifically a trail race. The entire run was on trail.
Wow.
So you need to be prepared for those conditions. So if you want to go to perform, make sure you're running in trails. Make sure you're implementing hills into your bike rides. Like for me, something else that I used to do, luckily for the races that I train for, Newfoundland doesn't tend to have the best weather. So we get a lot of wind, we get a lot of rain. So when there was a Saturday morning and it was pouring down rain and windy, I was like, all right, let's go. I would take the bike off the trainer and I'd be gone outside. And as much as I hated it, it was awful. It was hard. But what it does for you is it mentally prepares you for the worst. So when I went to Celtman, I was ready because I had biked and I had trained in those windy conditions. I had trained in those rainy conditions. Well, I had been there before. I had trained in the water when it was windy as well. So, facing those waves in the water it wasn't really like, it didn't hold me back because I was ready. I was prepared. So if you're going there for performance, definitely make sure you're doing specific training for that race that you're signing up for. That would be my biggest piece of advice for anyone that's going there to really try to compete.
That's great. And then how about for support crew? How do you recommend support crews maybe prepare themselves, and how can they help their athletes during the race?
So I can kind of give you a couple of little quick stories on the support crew, but the support crew, if they're not doing the full marathon with you, like that last 10K, I don't necessarily think they need to train for 6 months straight to run the 10K, depending on what their fitness level is. But they definitely need to train to an extent where they're able to run 10K comfortably, but also they need to be able to hike, right? Because running 10K and then hiking a mountain is different. Again, it's different muscle groups that you're using, right? So you need to be able to explain that to them. And if they need help with their training, then if you're someone who's being coached, and you could ask your coach, like, hey, this is my support crew member, what can you give them for, even if they want to sign on for coaching for a month with the coach that the athlete is with, then that might be something they can work out, or 2 months or whatever. But I definitely think it's important for them to also be fit, because you don't want them to be less conditioned than you, right? Because you want them to push you to get up those tough parts in those mountains. Okay. So that would be one thing on the physical side. On the mental side and on the helpful side, when you're doing these races, I'll just give you a quick example. In my last race in Swedeman, I went into that race because in Celtman, so real quick, quick story here on the t-shirts. For all these races, there's usually 2 types of t-shirts. There's a white t-shirt and then there's a colored t-shirt. So you get the colored t-shirt if you meet the cutoff time for the mountain. Okay. So if you don't meet the cutoff time for the mountain, that means if you're not at the base of the mountain by a certain time, you are not eligible to go up the mountain section. Okay. There's usually a different section that you go to. In Celtman, one of the hardest races I've ever done, again, like, I did not make that cutoff time. So that was really stuck in my head all summer. So I did Canadaman and I did end up making the mountain section there, and everything was fine. But in Swedeman, it was the first race. It was the first race ever done, inaugural race for Swedeman. And I just went into that race saying, I need to make that cutoff time. So everything about that day, that was really my why that day. I was really upset that I didn't make the cutoff time in Celtman. So anyways, I had really drained a lot of my energy in that first 12 or 13 hours of that day, but I made the cutoff time, and I was actually there 45 minutes before the cutoff. So I was really happy about that, but at the same time, I was drained. My body was completely cooked. So my brother was with me. He was actually my support crew member. And we got all of our gear. I got refueled up, and he had fuel in his bag, and we were ready to go. So we started the mountain section, and about, I would say in the first 2K, it was when it started to get real steep and we started to get into the intense climbs. I just hit a wall. It was bad. It was bad. And, it was so bad where I was basically just like barely walking. Definitely wasn't a power walk. And I was kind of stopping intermittently and just being like, I need a break. So what he did as support crew member, and this was, I'll never forget this because I really think that this helped save my race. So he was like, all right, Ben, you see those pegs? Do you see those pegs up on the mountain? And I was like, yeah, like, you know, it was probably one every 10 meters, but the pegs were to keep everybody in line to stay on the course. He said, every time we hit a peg, I want you to take 2 gulps of Gatorade. So 2 big gulps of Gatorade. So I started doing that. And what had happened was I was just so dehydrated because I had worked so hard in that race. And on that run, I was just so focused of getting that first 30K done in a certain amount of time that I had actually slacked off when I was by myself in the trails from hydrating and fueling. Because there was nobody with me in those trails. So I had slacked off from doing it. And one reason I know that I definitely did is because, and this is another thing, if you're racing and you pee and you check your pee and it's yellow, like, you know, you're getting dehydrated, and mine was. So I knew that I was kind of dehydrated starting it, but he had forced me. And this is the thing about a support crew member. And I had actually told him this before we started. I said, man, you got to make sure I'm hydrating, I'm fueling. So important. So he understood the importance. So also educate your support crew member on the importance of hydrating and fueling. So after I started, you know, hydrating myself, and then, you know, he would give me some gummies and I started fueling. Honestly, within 20 minutes, I felt good again. I felt my strength come back. And then we finished hard. Like, we finished the last 7K of that race, or probably 6K of that race, at a pretty good pace. And we ended up actually passing a few people. So that is just the importance of having a support crew member, having someone there to support you. And then also, you know, keeping you on track with your nutrition. Because when you're in an event for 14 or 15 hours, you know, psychologically, your mind is just fatigued, your body's fatigued, and you just forget about it. Like really all you want to do is sleep at that point. You just want to be done. But that's the benefit of having a support crew member and having them understand the benefits of fuel and hydration.
Well, great. I always set a timer on my watch to remind me to fuel and hydrate, but during the long days, I end up you start tuning it out. So having that support crew there to remind you to do it.
And that's a really good point too, Kelly. Like the timer, I didn't even think of that, but that's a really good point that you made. Like, just having that time, like if it's every 15 minutes, once that beeps, like, you know, you have to take in some fuel, right?
Right.
So maybe that's something I'll try in my next race.
Just now, after it goes off for, 5 hours, maybe even less, you just start to tune it out and forget.
You tune it out.
You're like, oh, it's just my watch again. I forgot what it's telling me.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Ben, I think all this information is going to be really helpful for coaches to prepare their athletes, and also for athletes and their support crew. So I appreciate your time. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think would be beneficial?
I think we've really covered most things.
Yeah, because we looked at the physical, mental, logistics, fueling, hydration, words of wisdom. We covered a lot.
We've covered a lot of things. The only thing that we really didn't cover too much in depth is tapering. That's a really complex subject too. And I think it's different for everyone. And I think that tapering is one of those things that you have to figure out over time, like how your body adapts. But one thing that I will say about tapering is, when you taper, you know, whether it's 2 or 3 weeks out, I usually start tapering 3 weeks out in the XTRIs, and just trust the training that you've done. Like that week before, or that 2 weeks before, when your training volume drops 50%, don't think like, oh my God, I'm dropping my training 50% volume, I'm not going to be able to do this race, because that's not how it is. That's not how it works. Like, if you've really put in the work, if you've done those long rides, those 6-7 hour rides, if you've done those long runs, you've done those long swims, you're going to be fine. Trust the process and let your body absorb that training in your taper weeks. that would be, I guess, my last bit of advice. Like, don't freak out over taper. There's a
Don't
reason.
freak out and think you haven't done enough.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And I've talked to so many people where they get so anxious in that last week and they're like, well, how come I'm not running 20K this week? I'm like, well, it's because you're tapering. So, I just really, really believe that if you put the training in and your mindset is positive and you're focused and you know your why, you'll have no problem doing these races. So you just got to keep that positive mindset and push through when it gets tough. I mean, you're going to have times in these races when it does get tough, but again, you need to fall back on your why. You need to keep that positive mindset and you just need to push through. This becomes such a mental game, much more than a physical game. I personally believe that. Like,
Yeah.
there's going to be a time in the race when your body is just tired. It's saying, "Why are we doing this?" But it's your mind, and it's such a powerful, powerful organ. Like, you need to be able to condition your mind in training so that once you do the race, you've kind of been there. You've trained your mind to be able to push through these tough sections of the race or tough days. Yeah. So yeah, definitely put in the training, and if you do the training, you'll be okay, I think.
Well, great. So my last question for you
Yeah.
is, which is your next extreme triathlon?
All right. Well, I did sign up for Canadaman this year, and I'm kind of drifting more towards the side of performance in doing these events now. So, I was really focused hard on Canadaman this year. My first 3 months of training, January, February, March, they were the hardest months I've ever done in my life of training. So I was really locked in at trying to put in a real good time this year. So next year, I'm going to do Canadaman again. And I kind of got my eye on Norseman. I'd like to try to qualify for that. So we'll see what happens. I'm just getting back to training now after 6 months, which I feel great now. It's really, really nice to be able to get back to doing what I love. I'm doing my first half Ironman in Palm Springs in Indian Wells in December.
Oh, that's
So I'm doing that, so that'll be kind of like a little start. I know it's off season for most people, but it's like kind of my season because I missed all of like the triathlon season this year. So I'm really excited about that. And Canadaman is the next one for next July. And then my ultimate goal is to race in Norseman. That's always been a goal of mine. And hopefully I'll get there. I still applied for the lottery this year. So if you haven't applied for the lottery yet, apply. I think they close like tomorrow or November 5th or 6th or something like that.
Oh,
So yeah, so like, because the X Tris, there's like 7 or 8 or 9 of them now as part of the X Tri World Tour, and they're all over the world and they're all different months throughout the year. So if anyone isn't interested in doing that, make sure you apply. Not all of them have a lottery system, but the real big ones like Swedeman, Celtman, Norseman, they all have a lottery system. So if you want to get into that race, the more times you apply year after year, the higher the chance you have of being accepted. And then the Norseman is the World Championships. So if you come first or second, male or female, in an X Tri race, that qualifies you for World Championships. So it's pretty cool. It's like a different. It's not Ironman, but it's a different brand of triathlon, and it's super fun and really addicting.
well, good luck with that, with Canadaman, and hopefully getting to Norseman. That's exciting.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
All right, Ben. Well, I thank you so much for your time. I took really good notes and also recorded this, so I'll put this online for other coaches and athletes to see. I think it'll be very helpful.
Yeah, and if, I'd also like to let everyone know, like, if anyone had any questions, you can just follow me, Ben Hayley, at Instagram. And if you want to reach out, like, don't feel like, oh, I'm bugging them. Like, I love talking about triathlon, and if anyone ever wanted to just direct message me, I'm totally fine with that. And I've had a couple of people actually message me. And I've actually messaged people in the past who won, the guy who won Canadaman a few years back. Like I messaged him and he was great. He told me a little bit about the course, and I just think it's a really cool community. And yeah, so if anyone ever has any questions about a specific race that they are looking at doing and they're training for, then yeah, feel free to reach out and I can give you just a little bit of advice or feedback from what to expect when you race it. Yeah,
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much.
no problem.
All right.
So,
Enjoy the
yeah,
rest of your day.
it was great talking with you, Kelly, and thanks for having me on.
Oh, of course. I really appreciate your time.
No problem. Take care now.
Thanks.